Hey, what's going on? This is Sports Truth. I'm your host, favorite host in the entire world, Jordan Harris. Today, we are finally going to answer the question that I've received a bunch of times in the comment section. And that question is, how does a guy from Kansas end up being a Miami Hurricanes fan? And I think it's a fair question. So I figured I would take some time today to give you the full answer on exactly how I became a Miami Hurricanes fan, born and raised in Wichita, Kansas. Sounds weird, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you the full story right now, okay? So here's where I grew up in Wichita, Kansas. Harris Family Farm. So before I went to school every day, I'd have to wake up, milk all the cows, tend to all the horses, make sure just regular farm living. Had to do that kind of thing. That's what we do here in Kansas. So that's just how I grew up. Wasn't a whole lot to do. Just living the typical Kansas farm life, right? Um, I'm joking. That's not how we live in Kansas. Most people think that everybody in Kansas lives on a farm. Whenever they think of Kansas, they think of cows. They think of big, long areas full of wheat and all that kind of stuff. I know nothing about the farm life. Like, I live in Wichita, Kansas. I was born and raised in Wichita, Kansas. It's a city. It's not a huge city, but it's a city. There's tall buildings, there's downtown, there's everything that you have in your city, whether you live in Miami or you live in Orlando or you live in Houston, wherever you live at, Wichita has just about the exact same thing. There's nice folks in Wichita. There's also places I could take you in Wichita that would make you terrified and say, we need to leave right now. You know what I'm saying? So I live, like I said, Wichita, Kansas, city life. I don't know anything about farm life. So next time you think about Wichita or you think about Kansas, please don't think that we are all people with straw in our mouth or wearing cowboy hats and all that kind of stuff. It's not what it's like here in Wichita. It's probably really similar to wherever you live. This is what it looks like. This is actually the skyline of Wichita downtown. So, yeah, no farms, no milking cows, or nothing like that. So let's go ahead and move on. I talk to my kids all the time, and I want to explain some backstory here about how I actually became a Hurricanes fan. I want to take you way back. All right. So this is my kid, Teddy. This is my 2-year-old son. I have 3 kids, and I've got 1 kid on the way. So I'll have 4 by the end of this year. But 4, and that'll be it, by the way. No more after 4. So I tell my kids all the time that they grew up totally different than when I grew up. Like, they have nice cars. They live in a big house. They can stream whatever TV show they want to, whatever movie they want to. We have literally every single streaming service you can think of. We even have Stars. I know it's crazy, but I tell them how different they live compared to how we grew up. I was born in 1987, so I grew up late 80s, obviously, but most of my growing up years was in the 90s. I'm a 90s kid. So if you know anything about the 90s, this won't surprise you. This won't shock you. Okay? So I got to talk to you, like I said earlier, my kids, they are so used to being able to just stream whatever movie they think of. They can just search it in one of these streaming services and they can watch it right then and there. That's not how we grew up in the 90s. If you don't know what this is a VHS tape. All right. So, and that is a VCR. And also, if you grew up in the 90s, you would definitely know what Be Kind Rewind means. Right. So, um, in the 90s, it was not, we couldn't just stream what you wanted to watch. Most of the time, especially if you grew up like I did, where my parents struggled to keep the lights on, they struggled to keep the electricity, and they struggled to pay the water bill. If you were like that, then you're just like that's just how I grew up. Didn't have a lot of extra money, which means we didn't have a lot of entertainment outside of playing sports. So the entertainment that we did have, it came from this. This is part of what we had. If you had a video game system, great. But outside of that, You had a handful of VHS tapes that you could put in your VCR and watch those. Most people that I know who grew up like I did, they just had a handful of them, maybe five. If you were lucky, you had 15, 20 of them. But you just cycle through those movies and you watch them over and over and over until the tape played out. So for me, I had the Ninja Turtles movie that you just saw up there. I had Tango and Cash. I was like 5 years old watching Tango and Cash every day. Weird, I know. I had Batman. I had this weird movie called House 2. I don't know why. Like, my parents just had these. We had like just a few random movies laying around the house. And my brother and I would be like, let's watch Batman today. Or we'd say, let's watch House 2. And then we'd finish it and then maybe start it over again. Like, rewind it and watch it all over again. But we just had a few of them. We didn't have these streaming services where you can pull from thousands of movies. We had like 5 to 10 movies that we just went through every single day. But one of those tapes that we had was College Football Funnies from 1990. So that is one of the movies that we would, or I shouldn't say movies, that was one of the tapes that we would watch. And we watched this tape until it actually played out. Like, the VCR ended up eating the tape. If you're from the 90s, you know what that means. So this is one of those videos that we would watch over and over and over. And this ended up being my introduction into college football when I was probably 6 years old, 5 or 6 years old. So ESPN home video, College Football Funnies, and they just showed bloopers basically from the 1990s and 1989 season. And at that time, I remember they had this big, huge segment in this tape about how good Penn State was, but then they also had a bunch of highlights from Miami. And I remember seeing the U all over that video, all over that tape. I'm like, that's pretty cool. But, I didn't think too much of it. But it was that U was always imprinted in my head since then. But this tape, my brother and I'm telling you, we would watch the whole tape and then press the stop button, press rewind, and have it rewind all the way to the beginning, push play, and then watch the whole thing again because there was nothing else to do. So, you know what I'm saying? So, yeah, that's how it was growing up in the early 90s. But then, years later, I remember if I was born in 87, so I was like 16, 15 years old or so, about 15 years old. I was introduced to college football way back with that tape. So way back when I was like 6 years old, I was introduced to college football. And I remember watching it with my dad and everything, but I never had a favorite team. I would just watch the sport, but I never had a favorite team. I would, every game that came on Saturday evening, I would watch those. Every game that came on Saturday afternoon, I would watch that. And then obviously I would watch almost every bowl game that they put on TV. And the one game that I would absolutely watch every year was the championship. And that's the same thing with most people, I think. So this year, I remember watching the Miami Hurricanes versus the Ohio State Buckeyes. One random year, I came home. I think I came home from basketball practice, actually. Because my brother and we grew up playing basketball. So I came home from basketball practice. And I remember walking in, turned the TV on, and the very first play that I saw was Willis McGahee's leg injury. It was the first play that I saw when I turned the TV on. I was like, yikes. So once again, I knew who Miami was. I had watched them play many times, but it was not close to my favorite team. Wasn't even close. I just sat down and watched the game. So I hate to remind y'all about this, but this top picture here is a picture of the Hurricanes starting to celebrate during that championship game. But then there's a little piece of yellow laundry on the field. And, of course, you can see the referee in the background who just threw that flag. So watching that game and seeing how it ended, I've always been a person that roots for either the underdog or people that I feel like have been wronged in a situation. So when I watched that game, it did something to me. I'm like, that just seemed wrong. Like, I hated the way that game ended. I felt like it shouldn't. And like, once again, the Hurricanes were not my team at that point. I just felt like they got cheated. Like I felt like they got shafted, and I hate this. I do not like when people say, "Oh, they cheated, they cheated, they cheated." I don't like that. But I really felt like this was one of those times where I was like, they seem like they got the shaft this time. This Hurricanes team, they seem like the better team. They played a little tight, and they got shafted at the end. They got cheated. That's how I felt. So since I'm an underdog rooter, cheer on guy like I am, I was like, I want them to win the whole thing next year. I want them to bounce back and win the whole thing next year. So was I a Hurricanes fan after that point? If somebody would have asked me that, I'd be like, no, I'm not a Hurricanes fan. I'm not a diehard fan for sure. I would consider myself a fan from afar. So that means, like, I wouldn't watch every Hurricanes game. I would just check the score after. Like, maybe I would see on Sunday watching the NFL games, I would see the score come across the bottom. I'm like, oh, yeah, Hurricanes won. Cool. If they lost, oh, the Hurricanes lost. That's too bad. The wins didn't make me happy. The losses didn't make me upset. It was just kind of like, hey, it would be cool if they won, but I'm just a fan from afar. I'm not affected one way or another with how they do. I just think it would be cool if they won. That was my mentality at that time. All right, so then the more I paid attention to their record, like first, in 2002, they lost the championship game. They went 12-1. Then they went 11-2. Then they went 9-3. Then they went 9-3 again. And then they went 7-6. Right around that 9-5, right around that 9-3 season, like in 2005, that's right around the time when I started to care more and more. And I started to say, what's going on? Like, what's going on with this team? What's happening? Like, right. And then once the 7-6 season happened, I was like, if we're saying like today, I would say I'm 10 out of 10 Miami Hurricane fan. When they lose, I'm pissed. When they win, I'm super hyped. So I'm like a 10 out of 10 on my scale level on like how it affects me. So in the 2003 season, I was at like a 2 out of 10. Didn't do much for me. Once we got to like the 2005 season, I was at like a 7.5, where I would be on my phone or I'd be on the computer during the games, like looking at the game cast. If it wasn't on TV, I would be going to ESPN and looking at the game cast, doing the play-by-play, if you remember that back in the day, doing the play-by-play to see how it's going, trying to find it on the radio, all that kind of stuff. Then when 2006 rolled around, I jumped up to like an 8 because I was like, something's going wrong. I don't know what it is. And I'm like, this Larry Coker dude, he got handed the keys to a Maserati and he is tricking it off. Like, that's when I was like, that dude's got to go and he got to go right now. So watching how they almost were there in 2002, and I'm thinking it'd be cool if they win the whole thing next year, and they go down a little bit. And then the year after that, they go down a little bit more. And then they start to go down even more. I got more and more invested in it and wanting to see them win. So soon after that, people in my family, you know how families are, right? So I would go to school and people would hear about me being a Miami fan or whatever it may be, being a Miami fan from afar, whatever you want to call it. My friends at school would hear about it and they'd be like, man, I see a Hurricanes took another L. They start chuckling and making these little jokes. And then my family, a lot of my family's from Oklahoma, so they're all OU fans. They love the Sooners. So I'd go over to my cousin's house or I'd go to my brother's house and we'd have all the cousins over and they start talking about the Sooners and they start talking about, Jordan, who you like? And I'm like, yeah, I root for the Hurricanes. And they're like, oh, y'all terrible. So the more I would go to my cousins and talk to my friends and they would talk bad about the Hurricanes, the more I started to root for them and want them to win. It just like invigorated this crazy drive to see this team actually win now. And when they started to lose, it started to affect me. And then after that, they finally got rid of Larry Coker. Thank the good Lord. They got rid of him. And then they brought in Randy Shannon. So I told you earlier, I've always been a big fan of underdogs, and since minority coaches don't get a fair shake most of the time, and it's really hard for minority coaches to get an opportunity, I loved this hire. It made me want to root for the Hurricanes even more. That is what took me from like an 8 all the way up to 10. That's when I started looking at recruiting classes on a daily or a weekly basis. It's when I started saying, hey, like talking to my wife, like, hey, I don't know what you got going on Saturday, but at 2 o'clock, I need to be at home because the Hurricanes playing. Like that's around the time where I just flipped from being a Hurricanes guy to like a Miami Hurricanes fanatic, where I'm watching every single game. I'm checking to see who's coming who's doing visits, who's coming as far as recruiting goes, all of that stuff. That's when it changed for me. Is when Randy Shannon came in, and I was like, I'm fully on board now. So that is my how in the world does a guy from Kansas become a Miami Hurricanes fan? That's my answer to it. Um, if you've watched this channel, you've heard me quote my favorite rapper, my favorite entrepreneur, Jay-Z, quite a bit. Um, he said, I didn't choose this life chose me. So that's kind of how I feel about this hurricane stuff. Like, you know, when you're in Kansas, the Jayhawks and the Wichita State Shockers is who you root for in basketball most of the time. And most people who love college football, they root for the K-State Wildcats. I'm just not a Wildcats guy. I can't stand the Wildcats. And I just fell into the Hurricanes. And now I can't help it. It is what it is. It's my team. And I'm telling you, like, wherever you are, you would be shocked by how many fans how many Miami Hurricanes fans there are in Kansas. You would be shocked. I know quite a few of them. Both of my cousins, Brandon and Jason, big Hurricanes fan. They got Hurricanes jerseys and shirts just like I do. I got a few friends that are Miami Hurricanes. It's quite a few of them. I see people riding around town with Hurricanes tags in front of their cars, pull up next to them and throw the U up to them, and they were like, yo! So there's more Hurricanes fans around the country than you would think. Because here in Wichita, Kansas, there's plenty. So there's the answer. I know quite a few people have asked that, so I've answered it. So there it is. The next time somebody asks me, I'm going to say, go ahead and look at the video that I made back on January 27th. Let me know your comments, man. I am interested to know, how did you become a Miami Hurricanes fan? Most of the time, obviously, you become a fan based on where you live. Like most people here, they love the Chiefs, even though the Chiefs are in Kansas City, Missouri. Most people here in Wichita, Kansas love the Chiefs because you see Chiefs flags and stuff everywhere. So let me know how you became a Miami Hurricanes fan. I'm really interested to hear about that. All right, that's all that I got for you today. You could be anywhere in the world, but you're here with me, and I truly appreciate that. Take care. God bless. Peace.